Today we're talking to Dr. Stephanie Steels, a lecturer in the Department of Social Care and Social Work here at Manchester Met. We're going to be talking to Stephanie about the big issues that surround public health at the moment and how her research is helping to tackle those challenges. So Stephanie, can you start by telling us a bit about your research, what you specialise in, and just a bit more about yourself in general?
So my research interests are in health systems, the theory around developing a health system and why they tend not to work, which is why I find them very interesting. So the difference between the planning and the theory and how that looks like in practice. But my main bread and butter is actually around evaluations and developing, I suppose, pragmatic evaluation methods for any type of evaluation that an NHS trust or a GP practice, perhaps, or even in social work and social care. So maybe you've got an intervention or a programme of work with some services or patients. You want to find out what's been working well, what hasn't been working well. And so you might come and have a chat with me and we'll sort of put together a method so you can go and find out the answers to those questions. And my background, so I have a degree in fine art, and then I went on and did a master's in Chinese business and Asia Pacific studies, and then after a few years of doing research I ended up doing a PhD in public health. So
you started off in quite different subjects, from fine art to Chinese business to sort of public health. What made you go through those changes?
So I won a scholarship to study art at the University of Leeds, and through that I focused on photography. So I was really interested in people and identity, and then through that there was this very niche course at Leeds where you had to take Chinese business as a module, but then you could devise your own MA programme, and I was really interested in Southeast Asia because my family are from that area. So then I could devise my whole MA programme around international development, sustainable development, looking at NGOs and how they operate. And through that I got interested in health. And then I was struggling to get a PhD straight away after completing my master's. So I ended up working in market research and building up my research skills. So really, like, how do you design research products with different clients? So I worked with Nestle and EDF Energy to design research products for them, and then I worked in local authorities, so then learning about research but more sort of service user focused, so designing research products around housing tenants. And then through that I ended up getting my first, I suppose, academic research job at the University of Liverpool. And then from there I've pretty much stayed in academia. I've dipped in and out. So I ended up working for the World Health Organization in Japan for a year. That was my first postdoc position. And before I came to MMU, I was working at the Department of Health and Social Care in their Global Health Security team.
What was that like, working at the World Health Organization in Japan?
It was amazing, really, really amazing. I think it was the first time on the induction I've ever been given a hard hat helmet as part of the sort of like, here is your computer, here's your phone and how it works. And because we live in an earthquake zone, here is a hard hat helmet. So, which I never had to use a helmet, but we did have a lot of earthquakes. So, yeah.
Did you ever think when you started your study into fine art that you would end up in that position where you were working for the World Health Organization?
No, and so I'm the first person in my family to go to university as well. So it's this running joke of, she'll never make it through a BA. So then I was like, right, I'm going to just finish it just to prove a point. And then it was, oh, I'll do a master's. And then again, it was like, oh, she might not finish it. She gets bored quite easily. So I finished it to prove a point, and then I think it got to, you know, it's like, oh, well, I'll just do a PhD and, you know, just overachieve in that area.
So you've now specialised in health data and public health. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that really came through my PhD, and I was looking at using European health indicators and whether you could apply them outside of Europe, and Vietnam was my case study. So part of our big research project, we had some Vietnamese partners. So I got to spend lots of time out in Vietnam, and it just made me sort of realise and appreciate we're quite lucky here in Europe and in the UK to have websites and access to data at the click of a button. But when I went out to Vietnam at that time, it's totally different now, they're all digital. But when I was doing my doctorate, you know, data was in a filing cabinet. So having to trawl through different offices and with my clunky laptop and manually input the data. So through there, I got really interested in data. I'm actually not very good at maths. A lot of people comment I'm not very good at maths, and I'm definitely not good at maths, but I'm really good at questioning the data and understand, like, sort of, I have an understanding of what different statistical values should mean, but I suppose I bring that more critical thought process to it, and ask those critical questions that maybe a statistician might not ask those questions because it's a given for them. And so when people say, like at the moment with COVID-19, and people talk about the R number and its importance of it being under 1 so we can have less lockdown measures, for me, like, my questions are, well, where does that data come from, and do you realise it's actually based on estimates, and how good are those estimates? And I think there's this thing around trust in numbers rather than actually trust in talking to people and observation. So we saw that with the PPE all over the news, that we had doctors and nurses saying we're not getting PPE equipment here on the front line, and then sort of when you're talking to government figures and ministers saying no, we've got the PPE there. But again, it's that difference between the number on a stats spreadsheet that says yes, we have X million pounds worth of PPE coming in, but there's a big difference between what the number is on the spreadsheet and then what the frontline doctor and nurse actually, when they open up the store cupboard and there's nothing there. So there's like a big disjoint between the two.
So in terms of the research you've been undertaking, how would you say that that links to current challenges? There's a lot going on in the world at the moment. I think that might be a little understatement, but what does your research contribute to that agenda?
So you may or may not be aware, but there is a UK vaccine network that has existed in the UK for a number of years now, and one of my current projects is actually evaluating that. So hopefully over the summer we'll be able to release more information around that. So there's a lot of things that perhaps you might not know exist as a program or a project, and actually my role is about shining a spotlight on those programs and projects that people might not know about. But actually by doing that, you sort of bringing them to the surface and hoping that people realise that actually, if we didn't have that program of work, then actually we might be slightly further back in how we're responding to COVID, for example. I mean, other work that I do around evaluations, there's probably some intervention somewhere that I have evaluated that you might have had some, you know, experience of. So for example, if you've been for a form of cancer screening, for example, it's very likely that, you know, there's been an evaluation that I've done a few years ago that has impacted on that service and how it's been shaped going through forward iterations of services. So I always like to think, I mean, one of the key drivers that sort of brought me to research was wanting to make a difference, but not one of those making a difference, i.e. a 4-star academic research paper that's published in the Lancet. I wanted to make sure that the research I did aligned with my own values, which I think some people might say, oh, you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot in terms of an academic career. but that's what really drives me. It gets me out of bed every day, is that, right, what can I do? What project can I shine a light on? And how can we make that better? It's not about being critical. It's that constructive feedback of, okay, so we have this bowel cancer screening service, for example, or the COVID-19 or the testing. It's like, that's really good. We've got something that's going. How can we make it better so we can get more people tested? So we're not having to rely so much on estimates anymore. We've actually got concrete figures.
We talked a little bit around COVID just then, and public health being one of the key issues that the whole world is facing at the moment. How do you see public health changing over the next sort of 12 months, and practitioners and academics like yourself, how do you think research and clinicians will change their behaviour towards meeting those challenges?
With COVID as well, now I think people are understanding that we've got Public Health England, but actually how public health is delivered across, certainly England, all the different UK nations deliver public health differently. So, for example, Scotland, how they operate is very different to how we do public health here in England. And here it's very devolved. So it's actually down to your local council in how they respond to local public health issues. So I remember when I was at Manchester working in public health there, and we did a lot of work around screening, particularly in ethnic minority communities, because we just weren't getting screening, like cancer screening through. We weren't getting the numbers high enough to ensure that we could pick up cancer early enough so that people weren't dying, so we could get them treated quicker. Whereas here in Leeds, there's been a big shift over the years around public health for sort of young people and around obesity, and making sure that people understand what is a healthy meal, what does one of your 5 a day look like. And I mean, we're probably all aware of public health. We might not necessarily say, oh, that's public health. So we all know that we should wash our hands, especially now with COVID-19. Even more so now, we should wash our hands when we come in the door and after using the toilet and before we have meals. Well, that all goes back to like hundreds of years ago, like basic public health hygiene, when we didn't really understand bacteria and what it did and germs, but we understood that if we didn't wash our hands, then you might feel poorly. So that's really where we sort of get the beginnings of public health.
You mentioned there earlier on about the kind of like the move now to more like local management of COVID-19 and how that's going to work. And I know Andy Burnham posted something recently on Twitter about how the move to relax lockdown is essentially like pushing it now out to the local councils and how they're going to manage it going forward. So from your perspective, what kind of challenges do you think you'll see coming up as a result of that? And I guess just how your research kind of ties into that, your expertise.
So one of the key problems will be around funding and public health expertise within local councils, because it's one of those, it used to be ring-fenced was the public health budget, and my understanding is that it's not ring-fenced anymore. So if you're a local council and you have statutory services to deliver, then you might dip into your public health budget to help with those other services, like children in care or perhaps care home needs. So it's going to be really problematic. Public health has been very underfunded, certainly over the last 10 years, probably more than that. So it's going to be really hard work. We used to have the Health Protection Agency back in 2000, when we had the swine flu pandemic, or whatever it was called, when we had swine flu, I think that was 2010, but we still had the Health Protection Agency there, and that meant that you could really find out what was going on at a local level because they just collected data on everything. And I know a lot of the criticisms about the swine flu was that, oh, we overdid it, you know, we overplanned for it, we stockpiled on too many meds that in the end weren't needed. But actually what happened was that not as many people developed swine flu and then developed the complications that came with that, because we had really good health data available, so we could really pinpoint, right, so and so's got potential swine flu, let's get them tested. So you had a test done and then you got tagged on a system, and someone from the public health agency would actually come round to your house depending on where you lived, and check that, you know, that you were still at home and not walking around and giving it to other people, whereas we don't have that at the moment. So what I'm hoping is that my research will start to open up that conversation. I think it's the elephant in the room that people talk about our numbers and data and number of cases. Then the problem is we don't actually know the true number of cases. So, you know, and that's why everything's based on an estimate. People also don't really go behind the headlines. So most news stories around COVID-19 statistics, you can go on the Office for National Statistics website and the Public Health England website, and you can download the Excel spreadsheets there yourself. And I would recommend that you go and do that, and you can see how little we have really. So I hope that, I think if you have more people digging around and flagging up, you know, why is this an estimate? Why don't we know the true number? Then they might do something about it and start to actually harvest more and more data, and trying to, I mean, one of the things I'm interested in is learning health systems. So how can you join up different health systems? So for example, if we had your GP practice data linked up to hospital data, then you could, in theory, if you came into A&E with COVID-19 symptoms, you could get tested in A&E, and then that person, all they would have to do is, with your NHS number, just tap in, this person now has COVID-19, and then that would automatically save onto your GP system.
So if I were to simplify your, to simplify it as much as possible in terms of your research and the impact that it has, it's about linking up the evidence and the experience of those people on the front line with the figures at the top that are then eventually reported, so connecting them together so that it's more evidence-based.
Yeah, so making it evidence-based policy making rather than what we tend to have, which is policy making evidence.
So I think you mentioned sort of a best case scenario in linking data together and creating almost like a web or a profile for each service user. You also said that there's potentially a lack of resource within local councils to be able to get to that point. So how close do you think, or how hard would it be to get to that stage?
So I know from another project I worked on called Connected Health Cities that there are academics across the north of England who have managed to link up data points, so have been able to link up your hospital data to a GP data. A lot of that was based on goodwill. So we had sort of small industry companies going, yes, sure, we'll come in and we'll, you know, because they wanted to be involved in an academic project. And so the program demonstrated proof of concept at small scale, that it is possible. We do have a lot of projects right across the UK which have sort of proved that it is possible to create these small learning health systems, and we can link data together, which is GDPR compliant. But it's that we still, there's a lot of people on board who are willing to do that, but actually what's needed is that sort of initial cash injection to facilitate that infrastructure upgrade. You know, there is a reason why hospitals are still using fax machines, and it's because there is no infrastructure budget. to facilitate things like broadband and Wi-Fi to be installed. And there's always a lot of fear with data, and because we've had the care.data incident many years ago, people are suspicious about how data is being used. We see it with the app, and how Google and Apple and Microsoft have access to data. So, and that's another issue I think that needs to still be addressed, is data, how is it used, what data is used, and actually having a conversation with the public. The conversations I've had through previous projects is that the public in general and patients, we're happy to share our data, our health data, if it's going to be used for specific research purposes to make a difference, and we see that investment back in our local communities. I think what we don't like is giving someone like Microsoft or Google or Apple access to our personal patient records, and then they go and make a profit off the back of it, and we don't see any of that investment going back into the NHS.
Could I just ask about going back to the Test and Trace app? Do you think that the move now to involve Google and I think, is it Apple as well that are involved? I'm not entirely sure. Like there's going to be a shift in public trust based on obviously what you said before, on them being reluctant to actually engage with it because it's a a corporation rather than the government.
Yeah, and I think the problem is the lack of transparency. And if you're doing anything, I mean, for me in particular, whatever I do, I want it to be as transparent as possible, because people get suspicious about what's going on. And I think especially when you are dealing with very confidential data, I think as a member of the public and as a patient, you have a right to know how it's being used. I have sat in research projects on other programs where we have had big industry, like big data players sat in the room, and they have not liked being told, well, of course, for we'd love to have you involved in the project, but it's on these terms, and these terms are we work with the public, and they don't like that. So I hope actually COVID-19 might, I don't know, it would be great if some ethical framework around big data came out through all of this, so that when we're either in another wave of COVID-19 or another pandemic in the future, that we do have got very set guidelines and frameworks that we can work in for research using like patient data and big data.
Looking outside of the UK then, more globally, how have you seen other communities around the world behaving in the wake of COVID-19, if it's been sort of reduced in those nations?
I think it's been quite interesting how different countries have, I suppose, responded to COVID. I know when lockdown came in Spain and Italy, a lot of assumptions were made around, oh, well, they're not going to comply, and that everybody complied. So I think COVID has challenged a lot of like everyone's perceptions as to, who might be compliant during lockdown and who isn't. I think it's also shine a light on, actually it is possible to do things best practice and to do things properly, and that actually it might not be popular to begin with, but actually people will appreciate it at the end. So New Zealand, I would say, like, good job, gold star in responding to COVID. I think Singapore's had some really great innovations especially with their tracking and tracing. Australia and New Zealand are coming into their winter, so really we ought to be looking over to them now in how they handle having full-blown flu and cold season with COVID on top. I know New Zealand will be a bit different because they've got more stricter lockdown measures compared to Australia, but there's a lot of learning that we can borrow from as we start planning for the new winter flu season here in the UK.
So in terms of the challenges that you've talked about with Australia and New Zealand coming into winter, what things do you think might be challenging in that respect for those populations?
I think it will become harder to differentiate between flu and COVID-19 symptoms. As someone who has had the flu, I have lost sense of smell and taste, have had a high temperature, and so these are all COVID-19 symptoms. I think that it's going to be really difficult. There will be a lot of people all of a sudden saying that they have COVID-19 when it's very likely they've just got the flu. So that's going to be problematic. A piece of research I'm hoping that will get funded is around flu vaccination and COVID-19, and it's really about, is there a way that we can encourage people who are entitled in the UK to a flu vaccination? So these will be people who will be shielding already, the over 65s. This is a free flu vaccine that you can have every winter, and we never hit the rate that is set by the WHO. I think last year we were at 45%, which is really low, and it really needs to be up in the 75 plus for it to have an impact in keeping people out of hospital. Also, just building on from that, is I know a lot of research funding at the moment is being put into developing a COVID-19 vaccine. That doesn't mean that people will want to have a COVID-19 vaccine when it is ready. And we have seen this with Ebola and people being suspicious of the Ebola vaccine. So there needs to be a lot of work done, which isn't really being done at the moment. I think the assumption is being made that if we have a vaccine for COVID-19, everybody will just want it. And actually, there will be a lot of vaccine hesitancy. So you'll have people who will hesitate because they're not sure what the long-term implications will be, because we won't know how it will affect us in the long term if we do have a COVID-19 vaccine. We don't know how long it will last in our system if we do have a vaccine. So we're finding that now with Ebola, it starts to weaken after about 12 to 18 months, but no one's developed a booster. And then you need a trial that sort of looks at, is it okay then to give them the same shot that they had the first time around, or do we need to create a totally new booster vaccine for the second bit? So it's all those things. And on top of that, we now have a very, very loud anti-vax community. So that's where I'm hoping my research is going to feed into, both the how can we get vaccination rates and the flu vaccine for the forthcoming flu season, but also looking further ahead in terms of what can we learn in trying to get our population vaccinated with flu that we could then apply to COVID-19 as a vaccination program.
I mean, it sounds like that research is going to have such a massive implication and impact in the future.
Well, we just have to see if someone will fund it now.
So to everyone out there who's watching this, who might be
you're a funder, please fund. I'm only wanting to do a systematic scoping review. They're not very expensive, and you will have the results by the end of this year. So
for the good of society, please, we urge you to fund it. I just wanted to move briefly on then to some sort of ask you more about our postgraduate provision, and also prospective students who might be watching this. I guess thinking back to when you were an undergrad, looking at, or perhaps not because you were working in a different field, but what advice would you give to someone who's looking to potentially study a postgraduate course at Manchester Met?
So I would say that it's okay to change topic areas, to change disciplines. I am living proof that you can start off in one area and completely go in a totally different direction. And I think it's, if you are thinking of changing disciplines, it's looking at the transferable skills that you are building along the way. So I know people go, oh, but you got a degree in fine art, I can't really see how that helps you now when you're doing public health research. Well, a lot of my public health research is actually talking to people. And when you put a tape recorder in front of someone, people sort of jam up and they don't relax. And what I actually do is I use a lot of the skills I was taught to take photographs of people. Cuddly toys optional. It depends if I'm interviewing families. But yeah, I'm still using the same skill set in trying to get people to relax, so that they forget that the tape recorder's there on the table recording the conversation. So thinking about that, and actually it's because I knew I wanted to work in research, I think doing the art degree made me think broader about what research is and the skills needed, and made me realise actually research is research. It doesn't matter whether you're working in market research, developing a brand new chocolate bar, or whether you're an academic developing some new theoretical or astrophysics theory. We're all using the same skill set. So even if you're thinking of doing something in our faculty but you're coming in from arts and humanities, don't be put off from applying, go for it, because actually you'll bring a totally brand new perspective, and you'll challenge sort of the thinking in the faculty that you're joining.
How involved are you with postgraduate students?
So at the moment, I don't have any postgraduate students, and that's mainly to do with me being a new-ish member of staff. So I started just before lockdown. But I am, at the moment, I'm just picking up my BA dissertation students, and I'm hoping that I will pick up some MA or postgraduate and PhD students over the next few months. And I do like to push my students, and that's because that was my experience. So my professors, when I was doing my MA, they were very supportive, but they pushed me, and I was able to publish a book chapter during my MA, which is something you probably wouldn't do, but I was so supported by my supervisory team, so I was able to do that, and so that's something I try to bring in with my supervision is, you know, if you've got a good piece of research, then, you know, if I think you should have a go at publishing it, then I will support you to do that. And I have had students at other institutions that I've supervised. So these are postgraduate MA students, not PhD, these are MA students who have gone on and published in, you know, the British Journal of Social Work and other high impact journals. And the research is their dissertation project, which I have supervised, and I said, you ought to publish that. That is a really good piece of research. I'm sure someone would accept it. So I've had quite a number of publications through students who've gone on and done that. I've also had one student through a publication then got called up to a Parliament committee to go and present her research from her dissertation. I think, you know, when you do have you've got good supervisors, and we recognise what a good piece of research is, and which ones can actually go beyond being just a master's dissertation to actually, you should go and publish because this is an important conversation, or it's a really important contribution to the conversation in that particular topic area.
That's a really good example, the Parliament thing, that demonstrates the impact that it can have, like research can actually have, that the average person walking down the street wouldn't necessarily anticipate, that might not be familiar with academia, and a lot of postgraduate students won't necessarily be familiar with it as well. So it's nice to hear that.
Yeah. And I've had one student end up at an international conference as well, just again off the back of like their dissertation that they did, and because I was quite proactive, and I was like, well, actually, this is really niche. You don't get many people doing research in this area, and it just so happened that I saw a conference and I thought, just send an abstract in. Even if you don't get accepted, you've had that opportunity that a lot of students won't have which is just to submit an abstract to a conference. So certainly for students I supervise, I'm always on the lookout for other opportunities, because I think having experienced that myself, that then opened me up to, actually, this is what I want to do. I want a career as a researcher. I'd like to work in academia doing research. But unless you offer students those opportunities, they might not consider working as an academic researcher. So it's all about inspiring the new generation of researchers, really. You know, we talk about going shopping for clothes and you try things on, and you should be doing the same if you're looking for a course. You should be looking at, right, who would be teaching me, and does that align with where I'm thinking of going to? So for example, if you were thinking of coming to MMU and doing a postgraduate course, but then you're not sure, but then you're thinking, actually, I'm really interested in international health, then if you've done your research, then you'll probably find me. But then I would say, just click on the email me button and send me an email. It's like, I'm interested in coming to MMU. I'm interested in doing this degree program here. I'm interested in doing this as a career. What do you think? Do you have any advice? And I think for me, that's like a real, you know, a real feel-good factor when I do get those random emails from prospective students saying, I've read your profile. I mean, you know, talk about being like a ego stroking, you know. But it's great to be able to start that conversation and you know, to have the conversation with the student when they're thinking about it but they're not really sure, and then seeing them at graduation and you're there meeting their parents for the first time and they're saying, oh my gosh, you know, I'm so glad like they reached out to you, and you know, they've been really interested in like doing health in refugee camps, and we didn't think it was possible, but then because, you know, you've been able to facilitate some of that and like been able to link you up with people that you've worked at through the World Health Organization into those areas, so you can really get a good feel as to whether it's right for you or not, or where actually you could go work in another area. So having worked in the civil service now, I better place to say to someone, well, maybe academic research isn't for you, but actually you do really well in the civil service because of the type of work you're interested in doing, and that's what they focus on. So I suppose that is part of my role, is not necessarily about being a supervisor, it's like being that independent careers advice where you can come have a chat with me about, I want to do this, but I'm not really sure how I might go about doing it. It's like, yeah, we'll find a way to get you there. So
yeah, I think it's on the surface, it's a course, isn't it? But if you actually go a bit deeper, it's the people you meet.
Much more, especially I think at undergraduate it's a course, because most people, I remember being 18, it was like, yeah, it's a course, party time, you know, live away from home. But certainly when I did my masters, I mean, I remember I spent a good 6 months and I met two of my professors who ended up being my professors for coffee on separate occasions, so I could find out more about the course and what I would get out of it and what were my career prospects, and they really opened up my eyes to the realities as well, because I think you can have this perception of what it might be like to be an academic researcher, and they were both very frank and open with me about it. So it meant that when I did the course, I sort of went in with my eyes wide open and I knew what to expect, and I knew what I needed to get out of that course to then put me on a pathway to doing a PhD. And even when I'd left the course, I was still in touch with, and even now I'm still in touch with my old supervisors from my MA program, because yeah, it's just you develop a really good relationship, and they're always, especially when they've been the ones who really like encouraged you, and so having had that experience, I'm always like, oh, I want to try and get people moving forward. I mean, I do have a few students now who never thought about doing PhDs who are now on PhD programs at other institutions. So
okay, well, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been extremely interesting. I've learned a lot myself. and looking forward to speaking to you again soon.
You're very welcome, and any time.